Welcome to the sixth, seventh, I'm not sure, Denver ISSA virtual events. And as I say every time, we are going to be continuing these, literally counting this event, have nine more of these virtual events. So if you can't make one, you can certainly make another. They're on every Tuesday, Thursday, up until the very end of June. So my name is Teresa Garlick. I'm the Director of Membership for Denver ISSA, and I am really excited for the presentation that we have today, Dark Web Review, Dive into a Dark World with Alex Holden. This is a very sexy topic when we talk about the dark web. And so Alex is the founder and CISO of Hold Security, LLC. Under his leadership, security plays a pivotal role in information security and threat intelligence and has become one of the most recognizable names in its field. Holden is credited with the discovery of many high-profile breaches, including Adobe, Target, JPMorgan, and parts of the Yahoo and Equifax breaches. So Alex, we're really excited to hear from you, so I'll let you take it away now.
Thank you very much, and hello and welcome everybody. I'm going to be talking about the dark web today, and I want to give you a little bit of background and tell you a bigger story so you understand why it's so unusual to talk about the dark web, the adversaries, and what happens over there that affects us all. But first, I kind of want to give you an idea, like what we all were anticipating for the major breaches and threats in 2020. Going in 2020, there have been a lot of predictions about major breaches, about the events. A lot of them circled around the elections and the events that may be reminiscent of the 2016 when Russians meddled in our elections. But a lot of things went wrong, and starting with December of 2019, with Citrix vulnerabilities, gave the cyber criminals way into many of our major components of the infrastructure, to the new direction that U.S. took on the political arena and engaging in confrontations in cyberspace with Iran earlier in the year. Situations that we have with China that emerged, anything from the indictment of Equifax breach and Chinese People's Army, going down to other events, breaches, exposures, all culminated for us with the current situation that we are all in with COVID-19, and the crisis made even worse by cyber criminals who, in bigger numbers than ever, attacking us from the dark web, from their homes, using the unlimited resources that virtual cloud computing can get them. So we changed our way, and we didn't even get to elections yet. And some of it is coming back right now, even with Black Lives Matter movement being fueled by fake news and false narratives from foreign APTs. That's coming back circa 2015, when we had similar events in our society that were affecting us all. So we have a lot of things to discuss, to cover, but I also want to give you a better picture of what's going on the dark web. A little bit about myself, and why am I speaking to you with a Russian accent about the dark web. First of all, I'm not from Russia. Never been to Russia. I'm from Ukraine, but spent my last 30 years of my life here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, running working in the, cybersecurity. Most of that time, I became an IT professional back in 1993, and worked through this and got very interested in cybersecurity. Cybersecurity was just emerging late 90s, early 2000s, and I got really interested in cybersecurity research, finding bugs, vulnerabilities, which were much more abound then. But when I went to public from a large financial company at the end of 2000s into private practice, actually based initially in Denver, I was asked by a lot of our clients who is our adversaries, who are the bad guys who got into our systems, why did they do it, what data they have. And my linguistic skills and my heritage actually helped me to understand at least part of the cyber criminal mentality, helped me understand some of the ways that cyber criminals are taking advantage of us, how they're attacking, why they're doing it. But it's not only the Russian cyber criminals that we're dealing with. We're dealing with the vast majority of international bad guys. Yes, a lot of them live far away from the United States, simply because there are no extradition laws, for example, with Russia, with China, with Brazil, and many other countries that would actually bring these cyber criminals to justice. So we use our private resources to hunt them down, to understand how they function, and stop them in our own ways. Um, there's obviously a lot of cybercrime within the United States, within EU and other friendly countries, and we often work with law enforcement here and abroad to bring the cyber criminals to justice. But the idea that we had is not only defending technology, but going inside of cyber criminals organizations, understanding their language, not only linguistically, but technologically, understanding their mentality, and then diving deeper into their wrongdoings. We use social engineering techniques to get ourselves inside of their organizations, because it's still illegal to hack other people's computers, even though they're maybe cyber criminals. But it's absolutely legal to tell them half truths and get them to get accepted into their organizations and get the data from them, get intelligence, and bring that information back to the victims, try to recover stolen information and prevent breaches from happening. As my resume and as Teresa mentioned initially, my company found a lot of major breaches, and we found a lot of them not only through AI and technology, but also through social engineering, understanding cyber criminals. Why this is important is that today, when we're going to be talking about dark web, things that happening on dark web, you get to hear them from somebody who has first-hand experience, not as a cyber criminal, but as somebody watching those cyber criminals, monitoring them. And we will be reviewing threats today that are real, that are emerging across the board. So I want to give you more information, education, and that will help us build better defenses, better systems, better components of how we can be preventing these breaches. So we'll discuss the threats, we'll discuss how they map against the current defenses, and then we'll talk about the next generation. What is coming up next, and what can you do viably, feasibly, to defend and deter the cyber criminals from attacking your infrastructure. So that's my goal for today, to discuss it and give you more hints, more clues. As some of you may have questions that they arise, please post them in the channel so we can answer them for you and make this more interactive and more insightful. First, let's talk about methodology. And the terminology I'm going to be using today is a little bit maybe different, maybe standard, depending on your point of view. I'm saying, in many cases, not hackers, but cyber criminals, because I mean things that there are a lot of individuals who engage into hacking for good purposes. A lot of folks doing good things, and they call it hacking. Others use the word hacking as a derogatory term for cyber criminals. And I always say cyber criminals, or try to say cyber criminals, so you understand that we're dealing with people who breaking the laws, regulations, and they steal information. At the same time, we're going to be talking about different realms. Today's topic is talk about the dark web, and I want to give you my definition of the dark web and how I perceive this structure, this iceberg as it's in the graphic, and how I see the dark web maybe different from some of the standard definitions. First, we're going to be talking about the internet, and the internet I'm going to define for the purposes of this conversation as something that information that intended to be public, information on Google, indication, information on Wikipedia, things that designed to be kind of publicly displayed, and even if registration is needed, it's not restricted to individuals of a certain criteria, but anybody can get a registration and see things. Some of it is a part are parts of our social media, but every single system, every single component has a private part of it. Our infrastructures, our home networks, our corporate networks, components that we are trying to protect from others, sometimes with credentials, sometimes keeping them offline, sometimes doing different components that require authentication or authorization. I'm going to call this the deep web, things that are intended to be private. And the leakages, data exposures that we hear about so much lately is exactly a situation where the information that intended to be private becomes public due to a mistake, due to exposure or leakage. So these are not breaches per se, but more of exposures. The effect may be the same, and the bad guys may get the hands on the data that intended to be private and make it public, therefore bringing more exposure, bringing more issues, and creating breaches out of that. But today's topic is the dark web. The dark web is intended something that intended to be hidden, and it's not only the Tor websites, Onion, P2P networks, or anything like that. It's something, the concept of anything that is intended to be hidden for malicious purposes. So, on Tor websites, on Tor network, there are lots of legitimate services. There are hotlines for individuals who are experiencing physical or mental abuse. There are communication channels for dissidents in the countries where there is no freedom of expression. Even Facebook has a Tor or Onion rather web page where it makes itself available to people who otherwise don't have access to it. So Tor itself is not terrible. Onion networks are not terrible. It's what mostly it's being used for. So cybercrime, for abuse, trafficking of illicit goods or other information. That's what we consider to be bad, and that's what we consider to be the dark web. I also want to tell you that the dark web is closer than you think. The bad guys don't always hide their information within the Tor network. They don't always try to really hide everything and make it so obfuscated, encrypted. I can tell you that from our investigation and discovery of the target breach, we know that most of the bad guys who participated, or most of cyber criminals, knew each other either physically or communicated via Skype. Skype is not the dark web by definition, right? But it's the intention and the use of the information, how the bad guys walked up and down Moscow streets discussing their next steps, how they exchange information and talk to each other on Skype about doing the bad things. That's what would consider it to be an extension of the hidden networks, hidden communications, and then cybercrime that these bad guys committed. So that's kind of the methodology, terminology I'm going to be using today. And then let's talk about the different types of cyber criminals, because the dark web is full of the bad guys with ill intent. Some of them are much more exotic, some of them more mainstream. the vast majority of cyber criminals today are for-profit cyber criminals. These are the folks who are committing cybercrime for some kind of financial incentive. And that happens much more often than anything else, simply because money drives crime, and it's been driving the physical crime, and it's driving the cybercrime. Individuals on the other side of the planet that committing these crimes and looking to steal, let's say, $100, which is may not be a significant number for some of us, and definitely not significant number for a company or corporation. For them, that may be a monthly income for their family. So they have an incentive, and they will try over and over again, failing 99.99% of the time to get one 10,000th of a chance to succeed and make a lot of money. Cybercrime is vast, but for-profit cybercrime is the biggest part of it. There is no percentages to estimate, but the picture is changing. And with COVID-19 pandemic, when a lot of individuals were forced to be at home, some of them suffering significant effects, not only of financial shortages, but also effects of close quarters, mental issues, physical issues, not only COVID-19 related, but the individuals who've been stuck at home, stuck in four walls, had situations with mental breakdowns, and they go on the way of things to do crime and committing different ways to commit cybercrime. Cybercrime went up over the last 3 months around the world. We are seeing more than 2,500 new cyber criminals joining the ranks of cyber criminals in committing crimes. And I'm counting these numbers not of people saying, "Hey, I'm going to be a cyber criminal," or try to commit cybercrime, but actual crimes that sizable crimes that we're seeing being committed by new cyber criminals, specifically for profit. There is also a direction of hacktivism. Hacktivism is committing cybercrime or hacking for a cause, whether it is for some kind of idea, whether it's for religious, social, or political agenda. This is something that people are trying to do to show an opinion, show direction. And this is on the rise across the world for various reasons. We all remember anonymous group emerging for over the last decade, doing a lot of damage and keeping to their direction, keeping to their idea. And that's something that's been on the rise across, and with right now, Black Lives Matter, we're seeing slight increase in cybercrime that is contributable to this particular cause, or disguised to be contributed to this cause by some of the APTs. Not to be remiss is another group of revenge, individuals who are trying to exert their revenge by committing cyber crimes. We hear and see less and less of this in the news, but the situations that where we see insider threat, where situations where we see a person uh, perhaps terminated or having this vendetta against the employer, about against organization or anything like that, we're seeing that is also being shown. And in my personal opinion, it's probably the most destructive part of all these groups, because people who seeking revenge, in many cases, they seek malevolence. They're not trying to make a statement like activists. They're not trying to profit from their crime, but they're just trying to cause this significant damage across the world. And then the last group I want to discuss today is state-sponsored cyber criminals. We always say, "Hey, Russians did it, or Chinese did it, or Iranians, or whoever." But if you think about state-sponsored cybercrime, you have to understand that it's very well organized. It's extremely well funded, and the operations that happening across the world, they are extremely well thought through. In many cases, it's very difficult to even figure out who these individuals are. Think about not the typical hackers that you would be associating sitting in the dark rooms in front of green screen monitors that we see in the movies. These are individuals coming to work in the typical settings that we would associate normal office jobs. These individuals sit in cubicles, they bring lunches from their families from home, and they're working on a daily basis to further the general idea that is given to them by corporations, by governments, by their sponsors. So the idea is that these cyber criminals working in different directions, and we actually had incredible glimpse in the beginning of this year in the state-sponsored cybercrime, as some countries went on full lockdown due to quarantine. And for example, we noticed that several cyber criminals, very vocal cyber criminals from Romanian underground, had disappeared when Chinese government went on lockdown. So, and then when they reemerged, they made poor excuses about COVID or related cases, while in Romania at the time there were only less than a dozen cases. All of them were traceable, not to these individuals. We saw the changes in the threat landscape, and a lot of APTs are currently reemerging with more thirst and with more direction than ever, because they had time to plot, to plan, and they have new trends and new attack patterns to try. So that's extremely difficult to realize, but saying that more state-sponsored cybercrime is to come later this year. But I want to talk about the techniques of common um, threat actors. Very common components that been changing over time, not particularly associated with cyber criminals just doing things outright, but something to talk about stealth. And hackers, as well as cyber criminals, know a lot about stealth. The idea is to hide themselves, hide their activities, because every time we see an attack coming in from IP address from Russia or from China, and somebody would declare, "Hey, Russian government or Chinese government is trying to hack me," that's probably not true. Chinese government, in fact, has one of the directives very simply stating that no attack, cyber attack, should come from Chinese soil or from Chinese IP space. So when you see an attack from a Chinese IP address, you know one thing at least: it's not Chinese government. They simply call it's not working. The cyber criminals actually hiding themselves in plain sight, like this cute-looking panda. They are trying to hide themselves, not by disguising themselves as a different country or using proxies, but in many cases they trying to be intelligent. They trying to be understanding of how they can be changing their appearance to appear as an average user, as an average corporate citizen. And later on in this presentation, we'll actually discuss these ins and outs so you have a better understanding of these events. Also, imitation is a big deal, because for the bad guys to create a new persona that is completely brand new and unusual would raise red flags because of our vigilance and device fingerprinting and so on and so forth. So today they are not doing as much of new personas, but imitation of existing one. And framing others is more of an APT technique. We noticed some of the state-sponsored cyber criminals um, copy each other's styles. So certain attacks look like they're coming from one country, from one APT group, but they simply an imitation of another. In fact, Russian government and their operations, they are specifically designing from this scratch, from the very beginning of their operation that has a target, who we're going to be impersonating, who we're going to be setting up for a foe during the entire operation, before the first byte gets transmitted, before anybody starts writing code. They are already framing somebody else for the attack. Think about as you're trying to defend your infrastructures against these type of attacks. But I want to also give you an interesting piece of research that we did. It's to give you an idea what is your identity, what pieces of personal information um, are out there that have certain value on the dark web. So just look at it from perspective, what's valuable, what's not, what the bad guys can get nearly for free, and what information is the most thought after. So first, we'll start to look at an identity from the general perspective, from the individuals, and then we'll jump into the corporate world. So first, let's talk about credentials, usernames and passwords. Email addresses and passwords. Emails addresses in this case would be considered to be usernames rather than gateway to your email. But just a username and password is nearly free on the dark web. There's so much stolen credentials out there that the bad guys have ability to find almost any stolen credential that may fit nearly every door that they will try to get into. It's doesn't not to say that every single credentials in your organization is exposed, not at all. It's to say that if your organization, for example, has 1,000 employees, so the chances are that the credentials of these employees, at least one of them would be on the dark web because they would be a victim of crime, not directly even, but maybe their data was in repositories of other companies, maybe found out there. And more the bad guys are looking for this data, bigger repositories they get, more chances of them having something on your organization. My company recovers stolen credentials and we return them to the victims. We currently try to defend 10 billion end user accounts for our clients. So we know a lot about credentials, and we see that every single month, over 100 million new, unique, unencrypted credentials that we've never seen before entering the black markets, entering the dark web. That's a huge amount, thinking that the cyber criminals not only looking for data points, but they also have a lot of credentials to enter our systems. Facebook information, not always a particular person, but just if somebody wants to gain access to Facebook, only goes for $1. But when we start talking about more private information, information such as social security number, that is also available almost for every person in the United States, and it's only $3. The service is usually called SSN DOB under various TLDs and various domains, offering almost every social security number in the United States with additional information about with name, address, and in some cases phone number and date of birth, only for $3. And that's for a never before stolen identity. If your identity was already sold on the dark web, your social security number goes down in price. It goes in first of all, in many dark web shops that sell social security number, it goes into the 30-day lockdown. So it does not go on. If somebody bought it 30 days after that, nobody for 30 days nobody can buy it. But after 30 days, they assume that cyber criminals, whoever bought it, probably already abused it. So it goes into used bin. In the used bin that we find a lot of social security numbers of our clients, it means that it's already been targeted, it's already being abused, but then the use bin, it only costs $1. So if somebody wants to try their luck and abuse that identity again, it's a bargain. It's only a certain price. Now, the credit cards are completely different. Credit cards may have balances and available credits in thousands of dollars. But because of change in this whole credit card fraud prevention that was not present, for example, when Target or Home Depot got breached, we see a big difference and big degradation in prices of credit cards on the dark web. We seeing the credit cards being offered for significantly less in price than their potential value. Why? Well, because in many cases, bad guys consider that credit cards are disposable and they're easy to report, so and they're easy to be detected and burned. So in many cases, we see that the stolen credit cards don't cost as much, but the bad guys can try using stolen credit cards over and over until they find the one that has less security, less awareness, and the user may not have appropriate alerts or vigilance to detect those charges. Our background checks, anything for identity fraud, also for knowledge-based authentication, is nearly everywhere costs about $12. That's a critical component, and we've seen these things happening across the dark web in many different places. Several years ago, we discussed this, and I actually witnessed in the real time one cyber criminal who was trying to bypass knowledge-based authentication (KBA) in the bank, and he was given a 3-minute timer to answer couple of several personal questions. One of them was previous addresses. Another one was about previously owned cars. He had 3 minutes, and I was watching this as in real time as he reached out to the background check selling service. He talked to tech support. He sent his request. He was provided a link to pay. He paid for the service, $12 in that case, and he received the full LexisNexis report, through which he was able to search really quickly and get the first item on the list, which was the previous home address. In order to continue the conversation, all within 3 minutes. He actually had 12 seconds left on the timer when he entered the first right answer from the background check in order to continue the abuse of the banking account. This is easy, unfortunately, and cyber criminals taking advantage of it in drones. Going from background check to credit reports, there is a slight difference in price. And don't think that Equifax data is sitting out there for somebody to look at. According to U.S. government, Equifax data is sitting somewhere securely within Chinese government repositories. And the Chinese government is not selling this data to cyber criminals. Cyber criminals have other ways to get to our credit reports. Today, the most commonly abused and trafficked credit report is not from Equifax, it's not from Experian, it's from TransUnion for some reason. But you see that the cost of your entire credit history is only $15. PayPal accounts are not that expensive either. Gaining access to a PayPal account may take additional steps, but $50 would all that would take for somebody to buy access to a working PayPal account with or without credit. The bad guys in the services like BlackPass that breaches hundreds of thousands of PayPal accounts every year. Run brute forces identifying through various sources vulnerable accounts where credentials are known. Check if those accounts have appropriate safeguards like 2FA or other verifications. Disable them whenever possible and put them out for sale almost immediately with some valuable balances, information about connected accounts or anything else. So they make it very simple. the bad guys, and they are succeeding in this as well. Medical records. Medical records are not expensive either, but they're usually very extensive. And there is not a huge dark web marketplace for millions of medical records. Remember that Anthem had the breach in 2015, losing over 80 million patient records, medical records. But not all of them are sitting out there available. And if you think about the medical record abuse and most of the misuse, it's not happening on huge scale. We always talk about ratios of abuse. In order to abuse certain information, you need to have scalability for your operation. Medical records can be abused in a variety of different ways. One of them, for example, is ordering medical devices. But you're not going to order 100,000 medical devices to be shipped to a single address, or even 10 or 20 different addresses. So a lot of this needs to be scaled down to a smaller amount of abuse. Insurance fraud also does not happen on a scale of hundreds of thousands or millions of victims. Uh, Prescription drug abuse can be done also on scale of dozens, but not hundreds of thousands of accounts. Most of the medical abuse happens on one to few ratios. So we are seeing that cyber criminals not always targeting the biggest hospitals. They're not always targeting insurance providers like Anthem. In some cases, they are targeting dentist office with maybe two or three doctors and maybe 1,000 patients. That's maybe all that they need to abuse certain components and do their cyber criminal activity. So when you hear about millions of medical records being available on the dark web, it's not always true. They may be stolen in these amounts, but the marketplace, the buying capabilities, definitely much smaller than you hear. Access to bank accounts is also not expensive, simply because of additional safeguards, additional components, and the cashing out complexities that the cyber criminals have. So they still have a price tag, but not as much. Last but not least, that I want to discuss today is access to email. It's not same as credentials. Credentials, maybe for sites that don't hold any information, don't require any additional components. But email access is on this list is much more valuable, simply because today our email is a default reset mechanism for a lot of credentials. It's a default communication channel, default impersonation channel. We see the bad guys getting into email accounts and not trying to steal information, but they try to look for who sends you information by source addresses. Maybe you received emails from stripe.com. So it looks like you may have an account there. So the bad guys would look at it and say, oh, yeah, you are a customer of Stripe. Let me try to reset your password, or PayPal, or a bank. This is where you will be storing all that information, or at least have your email as a contact point. So it's the most valuable piece. Next, I want to talk about the identity. So we talked a little bit about the cost of identity, abuse of identity, but on the dark web today, the identity is fluid. And this is just a simple example how identity theft is happening. For SSN DOB database, the bad guy no longer needs to go and log into a site and go to marketplace, register an account, and buy a set of information. Now it's part of a REST API. All they need to do is to get an API key, which costs money and that has a refillable wallet associated with it. But once they have that, they can basically plug in the information that they need within API and receive the information on social security numbers, dates of birth in very automated fashion. So in many cases where we see this information being stolen, information being abused, that's how these things work. In some cases, I see that the stolen identity is being bought not based on individuals. Yes, quite a few of them being targeted individuals because they're CEOs or some kind of corporate VIPs or well-known individuals. But on average, the identity theft happens not based on specific name or address, but based on zip codes and age. Let's talk about different zip codes. So, and the very affluent zip codes, 90210, the one I remember from a show. But let's say that in that zip code, the mean income is much higher than a zip code that would be based in South Side of Chicago. So, from my perspective, this is a critical component where the cyber criminals say, "Oh, I just need identities of stolen identities of individuals who home this particular zip code." The next component is age. An 18-year-old does not have much credit capabilities, nor they have probably a good financial background. Another is a 75-year-old, but somebody with an affluent zip code and being 50, 55 years old, probably prime for abuse much more than somebody in less affluent zip code, much younger or much older. Now, let's talk about the corporate side because we understand good about idea of a corporate personal assets, but corporate assets are different. So here's an idea that you need to get to understand that the corporate data right now over the past year went up in price quite significantly. Just email list of employees within a company or different highly valuable or corporate VIPs in certain cases cost $100+. We've seen a list of 300 individuals just with their names and email addresses going up to $3,000. But these are corporate VIPs in accounting, controllers, CFOs, and so on and so forth. The new wave, especially fueled by Citrix vulnerability from earlier this year, is Citrix ORDP access. It does not need to be an administrator. It's just a simple end user access. Citrix RDP to a large or mid-sized company may cost more than $1,000 for single username and password. Email access to individual email address on the corporate side is valued today more than $1,000. This is done for corporate abuse, phishing, impersonations, and so on and so forth. We see a lot of companies' email accounts compromised without proper defenses, very simply because somebody left something open and then it goes on the black market for thousands of dollars. Now, when we start talking about application administrator or some kind of administrative function, we're talking about more than $10,000 per account. And when we talk about the network administrator, somebody who can move smoothly within the environment, having access to Active Directory or underpinning infrastructure, that also costs more than $10,000 for a single account. And this is happening a lot. We see hundreds of bitcoins, and the bitcoin price is about $9,000 to $10,000 depending on the day today. But we see hundreds of those bitcoins moving between cyber criminals for a single or a set of different accounts. Think about your corporate data and how much more valuable than individual data, how much endangered it is, and what cyber criminals willing to pay and therefore do to gain access to something like this. One of the big takeaways from today that I want to discuss is to understand your footprint. You need to know what you're defending. On the personal side, you need to know where your data is. But on the corporate side, it's significantly more because you have a lot of users doing a lot of things, disclosing, trusting, or using their information for their purposes without thinking much about much. You also have to understand that your nemesis, your enemies, who are these cyber criminals, what they're doing, and how they're willing to defend themselves. We need to understand how to protect um, um, ourselves and risk versus rewards. In many cases, we want to protect everything at all times. But in order to build good infrastructure, you need to at least understand what are the currently trending vulnerabilities, attack patterns, and defend against them, because that will minimize your significant loss. And if the worst case to occur, trying to identify a loss. We come into many different incident response situations. We come in with many breaches. And the first component is to identify loss. In many cases, it's not as bad as it looks. In other cases, it's much worse than it looks, because initial vector of attack or additional components are not well known. Now, I want to take you further in the journey of on the dark web. I want to tell you more about one of the worst things that's hitting our infrastructures for the past decade: botnets. And the botnets work very simply. They exploit some kind of vulnerability or social engineering. They come in via email or websites. Somebody would click on an attachment, and then they have a chance of being infected if they don't have proper security, or they break the rules of being socially engineered to do that. Once infection is within your computer, they're delivered by, again, phishing or spam or otherwise, it tries to embed itself within your infrastructure, within your system, and explore available data. Exploration of your data right now is done by AI to figure out all the components, check your network connection, see if you're part of Active Directory or if you're a standalone device. What are credentials available to what systems? What software is loaded, so to figure out what industry you're in and what potential data is there for be stolen. Abuse that happens not only by stealing data, but also for other types of attacks. For example, distributed denial of service attacks or impersonation of proxies. Then putting all this data for sale on the dark web, or abusing this information themselves, asking for ransom or many other ways, and continue this cycle until the bad guys enrich themselves enough to stop. And so far, we see very few of them stopping. To give you a picture about botnet activities in 2020, it's changing a little bit. This is a heat map of MTET infections, not based on the reports, but based on the cyber criminals' activities. We have visibility into many major botnets, and we see their command and control centers and panels. So we mapped this out specifically with the new infections and abuses. You can see that the United States is not one of the main targets for the MTET botnet. Europe, Middle East, and Far East are much bigger targets today, because the bad guys are expanding, and the idea it's a global threat. The only major area is that's been spared is Russia, simply because cyber criminals are based there, so they are not attacking where they live. Another botnet called Anubis, which is a mobile botnet against Android devices, it's targeting standard devices, but it's being much more specific and attacking locales. For example, there is a botnet that's specifically targeting Spain and Poland. It's also trying to get additional information. When it's infecting your mobile device, it tries to intercept SMS messages and other communications, stealing your financial information and hiding all of this from the end user. To do it on a mobile device is much harder, because there are not a lot of background processing out there. So bad guys figure out other ways. You can see a green eye on the bottom right side of the image. it means that the function of Android to track eye movement is enabled and somebody's actively looking at the screen. This tells the bot itself not to do much because somebody's actively looking at their device, using Android function saying, hey, somebody's looking at it. On the right side further, there is a blue circle with feet in it. It's the pedometer readings. So the Anubis botnet operators figure out that if somebody is moving, they're less likely to be looking attentively at their screen than not. So they are tracking your movement if your device is infected, and trying to make a decision on what to do to your device, when to do it, to make sure that you're not paying attention to what's happening. They also mapping their infected devices on Yandex Maps. Well, they're Russians; they use Yandex Maps. But the reason why they need to know this is that they need to know where the victim is located. Just because they are based in Spain doesn't mean that they're in Spain today. So, in order for them to figure out where the victim is, they need to know their physical location, their coordinates. It's taps into geolocation on phones, targeting this and many, many other components. So it gets smarter, it gets more precise, and much more intrusive into your biometrics than you would ever want it to be. So botnets are not only looking at data, they're looking at us as humans, especially when attached to mobile devices. I want to take you on a very interesting journey for about a minute or two, and talk about other botnets. Some viruses, when they infect a system, they start establishing themselves on the system immediately. They need to take a look at your hardware and software to see what system is running, what version, what software, what's available. That's not unusual. To map your local network, yes, I would believe it. But in many cases, for myriad of internal reasons, the bad guys try to take a screenshot of your desktop to see what's running. The second thing is they try to take a picture from your webcam if it's available. Again, this may be morbid curiosity, but we're finding more and more webcam images, and we're finding out that it's not only invasion of our privacy, it's also invasion of our minds. You see more often than not children being in front of those cameras, and they being targeted by cyber criminals, but it can get much worse. But I want to give you something a little bit different. I want to give you kind of a journey into screenshots that the bad guys take of infected devices, and kind of give you a story. What happens? What does a screenshot see that's happening on a computer that was just infected by malware? The first image or first category, I'm not going to show you. My lawyers told me I can't, simply because, well, you guessed it, it's usually porn. The victims usually click on things and get infected. So unfortunately, looking at those screenshots, that's number one category. So let's start with category two. Sometimes people suspect that something went wrong because a whole bunch of windows popped up, and they go to antivirus. Antivirus says, hey, everything's okay, because the bad guys, when they build their malware, they scan it against current antiviruses and keep checking this against active antivirus services every single minute. Your antivirus definitions may be updated a couple times a day. The bad guys check every single minute, and if they detect within the minute that the executable is detectable, they will modify the footprint. They will have another executable uploaded to the system. So it's not detectable by most antiviruses. So here you see that different antivirus systems are saying, hey, everything is okay. We would love your feedback, Malwarebytes said. How did we do? Your computer is clean while virus is taking a picture of the desktop. Some people start seeking help almost immediately. They start scanning their machine, they start looking for additional components, and they are waiting for results. They're asking for help. and the virus is laughing at them, saying, "Hey, you can't get to me because I'm already on the system. I'm already controlling things. I already disabled features that could detect me." So the other step, when you feel that you have a virus, you start uninstalling random software, because it's a common assumption from a victim that antivirus came in with, I'm sorry, the virus got onto your system with an uninstall component for Microsoft Windows. Obviously, the virus is well embedded in your system. Installing random software does not help at all. But people definitely try. So next step, again, for some people, to try to install what they feel is a free antivirus to get rid of the virus that just loaded. And by that I mean they install more viruses. I really doubt that any legitimate antivirus company come up with run_0A6AD as their legitimate antivirus solution. Then the next and last category for this is that a lot of individuals actually realizing that the virus that was just installed, not the first virus installed on the system. It's already being infected by viruses, already being used for example, distributed denial of service systems, already been encrypted with ransomware. So in many cases, they are that virus that somebody installed in attempts to install antivirus that will decrypt the system that will rescue them from the attack. So sometimes the virus is not the first virus on the system. Dealing with ransomware and botnets, number one is patching. That's still the number one solution to make sure that your system's up to date. Backups are critical. We see a lot of events happening because of lack of backups. Early detection stops and deters most of the breaches, and proper response. We spent a lot of time helping companies recover from viruses and ransomware. Proper response, proper incident response techniques and detection definitely saves companies millions of dollars, public embarrassment, and worse. Because if you approach this problem correctly, even in retrospect, you still can emerge securely. Going into home stretch, I want to give you an idea what the currently stolen data looks like. A decade ago, the information on uh, bank information would be only the bad guys would need username and password, email, password. Today, I want to show you a very fascinating view into what really being sold when we talk about the banking abuse and information. This is not a single piece of information. The bad guys selling access to a single account within Lloyd's Bank in UK. Here's information that's been stolen from a single person via a single virus, and that's how it's being packaged for sale. This I redacted some of the information that you're seeing, obviously, to keep the victim's profile low. But I want to give you an idea of what was stolen from this individual in order to impersonate her. Her name is Allison. She has a birthday in March. The basic information like address, phone number makes sense. Even the carrier for the phone is important in order to impersonate and not to trigger any alerts. Email address, driver's license number, national insurance number, which is similar to social security number in United Kingdom, mother's maiden name, all of it is provided. When her machine was exploited, the bad guys also found a picture of her passport somewhere on her computer. So an Imgur remote image storage location for her passport is also being logged and offered for the bad guys for reference if anybody asks. On page 2, finally starts financial information. Credit card, bank identification number, bank information itself, type of a card, if more information about the card, even a phone number to call in order to confirm your identity because you have all that information already in your hands. Then you start with the name on the card, the full credit card number, expiration date, and additional information about the card. Page 3, we got CVV, date of birth, postcode, and then only page 3, they start caring about the password. It's not username and password anymore. There is so much more information that this lady lost. And then technical data. What IP address did she use for the impersonation, as close to her IP address, as close to her provider as possible? Her user agent, information about her browser, even the last sites that she visited, all this is available. More information about platform, that she is using iOS right now, everything that needed for impersonation, her screen size, her time zone, her language. In the UK, they don't use EN. US, it's English, Great Britain. So a lot of adaptations. And then there is an additional piece of bad guys software called FraudFox, which is a version of Firefox that can adjust itself completely to the needed profile to integrate itself, the user agent, all the components, the screen emulation. So there is a full profile that can be loaded in FraudFox to emulate this person. It's no longer just credentials. It's significantly more data stolen from a single victim in order to impersonate one thing. And in many cases, the bank defenses are not as effective with so much more information knowing about the victim in order to do abuse. So think about your defenses and how would they scale up outside of 2FA or MFA against these type of attacks. Really quickly, I want to talk about scalability. The bad guys no longer have limitation on how they would attack. They are having so much access to virtual devices. They have computing power, they have scanning power, they have proxies. They don't have slowness in parsing data or identifying attack patterns or abuse. They have AI to and even price it in competitive market, compare the prices in other dark web sites, and set the price competitive, not always the lowest. And then also intelligent abuse, how to stay stealthy, how to pick a system that's more interesting than another. They use Zoom info, for example, to grab information about the company's income, before making a decision to attack, to abuse, to ransom this information. Because if a company is tiny and then don't have a good financial record, they're not likely to pay for ransomware, but they may be likely to pay for stolen data. One of the things that we are suggesting to do is to think about honeypot systems, because as these attacks are happening and your systems are being targeted, it's not only installing a server within your infrastructure. Sometimes a honeypot is not feasible in the cloud, but honeypot doesn't need to be a server. It can be a component of your website. It can be a feature or a debug function. It can be even a set of credentials that you embed into your infrastructure to trigger on use or abuse, so you know that somebody is targeting your system. Honeypots are early detection points that you would embed, not to draw unneeded attention to you, but build new type of detection mechanism. Then somebody would trigger if they're really trying to attack. And we've seen already scalable honeypots that if somebody triggers something, they will offer secondary and tertiary challenges to keep the attackers occupied as the administrators trying to come up with defense mechanisms. At the end of this, I want to talk about other things that I briefly mentioned in the beginning, the data exposures, deep web going into the internet. And these things are happening through insecure design, lack of monitoring, lack of measurements, and not my problem. Today's world, we are seeing a change in the cybersecurity realm. It's not the dark web that's attacking us only. It's also security analysts who are trying to find fame by finding exposed data, stealing that data, and popularizing it through media. There are also mistakes made by employees that being highlighted more and more on daily basis to embarrass companies. Again, insecure by design is a challenge. We all know that it's a problem. Building better security measurements, monitoring them, and measuring performance is critical. And also, helping companies to recover from these things. We often see blame game. I didn't make a mistake, you did, something like that. In many cases, you're working within a team. You win as a team, you lose as a team. Blame game doesn't work. In many cases, we see a breach being attributed to a lack of patch. That's not always the case, and we see this mentality is leading to bigger exposures and bigger damages. So, by the way of solutions, at the end, I want to offer a couple general thoughts. First, I want to thank you for spending time and trying to understand this very important topic. Awareness, learning about the problems, is beginning of how we fix it. If we had more aware users, we will have less phishing, we'll have less attacks, we'll have better organization and defense mechanisms. So awareness is a solution. Second of all, is not always going out and buying the next technology. I'm not trying to sway anybody toward one technology or another. I think a lot of technologies are great, but it's also very valuable to look at what you already have as in your environment. And if you're leveraging their functions, if you're leveraging the features to get you more than what you have right now. In many cases, that's a great solution to cover the gaps to identify these issues. As I mentioned, there are lots of different threats, and the high priority threats, which are currently maybe trending, more popular, more powerful, or more impacting. These are the ones that you want to be addressing. Some of the others, even though you may have budget for them, may not be as effective because their priority in today's world is different, especially with COVID threat landscape, especially for work from home. Some of the initiatives need to be focused there rather than in some places as they had been maybe budgeted before. And the last piece is monitoring. Awareness is a great thing. Using technology is a great thing. Addressing threats, but watching out for these things, looking not only within your perimeter, but also within adversary space. It's a great step forward. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention. If there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them. And again, I wish you health, safety, and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Alex. This has been really scary as always, but it's also fascinating. And we don't have a lot of time, but I do have a few questions to ask. The first would be on Alice's bank info that you provided. Do the cyber criminals collect all that at one time, or do they build a profile and once they have it optimized, they offer it for sale, to your knowledge?
So most cyber criminals are kleptomaniacs. They try to collect as much data as possible once they get on your system, and they will figure out or not. The target breach started with somebody discarding credentials for an HVAC company and then selling it for equivalent of US $70 to bad guys. It's kleptomania, it's collecting everything. But there is also a priority list. Some bad guys know that they have limited amount of time on the system before detection, so there is a priority list. The priority they would go for financial data, data, and then they go down in priority and gathering all that additional information. It's a function of time and priorities, but all the data will be targeted eventually.
That makes sense. I believe you said that people believe viruses come with uninstalled software. Is that what you said? Because I can't imagine unless people think it's real antivirus software.
Unfortunately, not everybody who installs a virus are highly trained in the cybersecurity. In fact, obviously, more victims are less cybersecurity aware uh, than. So when you install something wrong, that they feel they did something wrong, the first intent is to fix it. And Microsoft Windows to fix things is to reboot or uninstall.
Right,
This is
right,
exactly the wrong reaction. This is, the reboot is embeds the virus within your system executables. Uninstall does absolutely nothing. But that's people's reaction, and that shows the average user education level, saying that they don't go report these issues. They try to fix the issues themselves.
right, right. Okay. And I'd like to, for the last question, go back to the different, you had talked about the different motivations. Revenge was one of them, and you've worked on a number of breaches. On the Capital One breach, because the hacker worked for Amazon, was revenge a motivation for that individual, or do you know much about that breach?
I actually know a lot about this. Uh, um, uh, Paige Thompson was driven purely by revenge most of her professional career. She actually accused of Amazon and her ex coworkers of calling her a pedophile and really driving her out of the company. So she actually made statements along those lines. And she was shortly after leaving Amazon, she was looking for any type of projects to put her food on her table. So if you look at all public statements, which misleading, we feel that she uh, felt greatly wronged by Amazon. Amazon was giving her skills to understand better AWS and the environment. And she did not make any statements about ill intent toward Capital One or other victims. She did not try to abuse data, yet her actions and her resentment toward Amazon and other things in the society really showed the actions. And there is no malevolence. There was no indication of her trying to hurt Amazon specifically, nor was a direction from Capital One. But her actions possibly were made worse by her employment by Amazon, and whether her accusations are true or not, her perception of Amazon treating her as an employee definitely played part in her ability to do toward in cyberspace.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all we have time for. Alex, I want to thank you very much for this. I personally really enjoyed your presentation, and I'm sure that, all the other people watching it and people who will watch it on YouTube will also enjoy it. Would like to know if it'd be okay for people to reach out to you on social media if they want to discuss this further.
Absolutely. My contact information is on the slides, and if anybody wants to reach out, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Alex, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. And our next event is next Tuesday, so be sure to sign up, and appreciate everybody spending time with us today. Thank you, and goodbye.